What if I told you there was a dog so aggressive, so uncontrollable, that it had to be erased from history? Not banned, not regulated, but removed. In the early 1900s, humans didn't just breed a fighting dog. They engineered an animal that ignored pain, bypassed warning signals, and attacked without hesitation. It didn't growl, it didn't threaten, it didn't stop. This wasn't a monster of nature. It was a biological experiment, and it worked too well. Today, this breed no longer exists, not because it was weak, but because it was too violent to survive. It didn't engage in the ritual of the threat. It moved directly from stillness to impact. It was a breed that functioned outside the standard parameters of canine behavior, not because it was inherently evil, but because it was meticulously built to be a biological dead end. Today, this dog no longer exists. It didn't succumb to disease, and it wasn't outcompeted by other predators. It was a breed that became so specialized for violence that it could no longer sustain its own existence. This isn't just a story about a lost breed. It's a look at what happens when human intervention removes the natural safeguards of biology. This dog was so vicious, it eventually disappeared forever. To understand why the Cordoba dog existed, you have to look at the environment of central Argentina a century ago. Cordoba was a hub of industry and agriculture, but it was also a place where physical utility was the primary measure of value. In the rural and working-class districts, animals weren't viewed through the lens of companionship. They were tools. Some were for herding, some were for guarding, and others were for the pit. At this time, dogfighting was a legal, commercial enterprise. It was a brutal industry, but it was an organized one. However, the breeders of the era felt they had hit a ceiling. The existing dogs, mostly local crosses and imported bulldogs, were seen as unreliable by the standards of the gamblers. They had a tendency to quit when injured or to show submission when overwhelmed. They had too much instinct for self-preservation. The breeders wanted to eliminate that instinct. They began a process of selective breeding that was radical, even by the standards of the time. They took the Old English Bulldog, the Bull Terrier, and the Alano Espanyol. They weren't looking for a balanced animal. They were isolating a specific trait, unconditional aggression. They were looking to create an animal that would continue to fight regardless of its own physical state. In the language of the pits, they were looking for total gameness. And in Cordoba, they found the formula. They created a dog that didn't just fight to win. It fought because it was the only thing it knew how to do. The resulting animal was a physiological powerhouse. The Cordoba fighting dog was typically white or light-colored, weighing between 80 and 100 pounds of dense, functional muscle. But the real changes were internal. They were psychological. First, the pain threshold. By doubling down on bulldog genetics, breeders created a dog with a nervous system that seemed almost indifferent to trauma. There are historical accounts of these dogs sustaining injuries that would be fatal to other breeds and continuing to engage as if nothing had happened. They had been bred to ignore the body's natural stop signals. Second, the loss of social inhibition. This is where the experiment turned dark. Most dogs have a bite inhibition that prevents them from killing their own kind or their handlers. In the Cordoba dog, this inhibition was systematically bred out. The dog didn't see a pack. It saw a series of targets. Third, the silence. As the breed developed, a strange trait emerged. They became unnervingly quiet. While most dogs use barking or growling to release nervous energy or signal intent, the Cordoba dog remained silent during an attack. This lack of vocalization made them highly effective in the pit, but it made them terrifying to handle. There was no lead-up to an incident. A handler could be standing next to a perfectly still dog, and a second later the dog would be in full engagement. It was a predator without a warning light. By 1925, the Cordoba fighting dog was the apex of its industry. But the very traits that made it a success in the pit were making it a failure as a biological entity. We often think that more power is always an evolutionary advantage, but in nature, too much of any one trait is a death sentence. The Cordoba dog was about to prove that an animal built only for conflict has no place in a world that requires cooperation to survive. The architects of this breed had succeeded so well that they had made the dog's survival impossible. The downfall of the Cordoba fighting dog wasn't caused by a change in the law. It was caused by the fact that the dogs had become socially illiterate. By the late 1920s, breeders were reporting a catastrophic problem. The dogs were becoming impossible to breed. In a standard breeding environment, a male and female engage in a complex set of social cues. The Cordoba dogs had lost the ability to read these cues. Instead of mating, the dogs would immediately attempt to kill each other. The aggression was so high that it overrode the reproductive instinct. This is a rarity in the animal kingdom. Usually, the drive to reproduce is the strongest force in biology. In the Cordoba dog, the drive to destroy had become stronger. It was a genetic glitch that effectively sterilized the breed. Furthermore, the litter mate syndrome was extreme. Puppies would begin fighting to the death before they were even old enough to be sold. Breeders were losing their inventory to the dog's own instability. They were raising animals that were programmed to eliminate their own siblings. The breed was essentially eating itself. As the 1930s approached, the utility of the dog began to diminish. It was a liability. It couldn't be kept with other dogs. It couldn't be handled safely by anyone other than a specialist, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to produce new generations. The perfect fighting dog had become a biological dead end. It was a design that functioned in the short term, but was fundamentally unsustainable. It was a predator that had run out of prey, starting with its own kind. This is where the story takes a turn toward a different kind of intervention. Antonio Norris Martinez, a local doctor and enthusiast, recognized the raw power of the Cordoba dog, but understood its fundamental flaws. He didn't want a fighting dog. He wanted a big game hunter, an animal that could work in the harsh terrain of the Pampas to hunt wild boar and pumas. Norris Martinez realized that to save the power of the Cordoba dog, he had to dilute its nature. He had to perform a sort of psychological reconstruction of the breed. He began a massive, multi-generational project to restructure the breed's temperament. He introduced the Great Pyrenees for its stability, the Irish Wolfhound for its speed, and the Great Dane for its size. He was essentially trying to rewire the brain of the Cordoba dog. He needed to keep the physical strength and the pain tolerance, but reintroduce the social signals that the original breeders had spent decades removing. Argentino, the result of this project, gained traction. The original Cordoba fighting dog was simply allowed to disappear. There was no official decree to end the breed. There were no protests. It was a quiet, deliberate phasing out. Breeders stopped putting the pure strain together because it was no longer profitable or safe. They shifted their focus to the dogo, which was a more functional, versatile animal that could actually live alongside humans. By the mid-1940s, the pure Cordoba fighting dog was gone. It didn't leave behind a fossil record or a legacy of companionship. It left behind a warning about the dangers of over-specialization. The Cordoba fighting dog is often forgotten because its existence is uncomfortable to remember. It represents a moment in history where humans didn't just domesticate an animal, but actively broke its biological compass. We created a creature that couldn't even recognize its own kind, all for the sake of a spectacle that we eventually outgrew. When we look at the Dogo Argentino today, we are looking at the repaired version of a very dark experiment. The white coat and the powerful jaw are still there, but the madness has been edited out. The Cordoba dog wasn't a monster of nature. It was a reflection of human priorities in a specific time and place. And its disappearance wasn't a loss for biodiversity, it was a necessary correction. We created a predator that was too violent to exist, and when we realized what we had done, we did the only thing we could. We let it fade away. If you want to understand the creatures that history tried to bury, subscribe to History's Forgotten Beasts.